A cargo ship floats motionless off the American coast. No crew, no orders, no destination. Within 48 hours, America's farmers would lose billions, its electric future would stall, and Washington would realize it had been outmaneuvered in a war it didn't know it was losing. Picture this. A colossal bulk carrier sitting dead in the water just beyond the harbor entrance near Duluth. Its massive hull bobs gently in the waves, but there's no rumble from the engine room, no activity on deck. The port cranes that should be loading grain stand frozen like skeletal monuments against the gray sky. This isn't a mechanical failure. This is the beginning of an economic earthquake. While that ship drifts aimlessly, something unprecedented is unfolding across global financial networks. Trading floors from Chicago to Sao Paulo erupt as a single headline tears across Reuters terminals. China has immediately halted all American soybean imports. Not reduced, not postponed, completely stopped. Within minutes, the math becomes terrifying. Contracts worth tens of billions of dollars simply vanish. Traders scramble. Phone lines overload. Cargo vessels already crossing the Pacific receive urgent orders to reverse course mid-ocean. The grain markets don't just fall, they collapse. Soybean futures at the Chicago Board of Trade plummet 6% in a single trading session, the steepest drop witnessed since the bitter trade disputes of 2018. Across Iowa's endless farmlands, where combines recently rolled through golden fields, growers stare at screens watching their year's work lose value in real time. Green figures flip to red. Profit margins evaporate. The message from Beijing is brutally simple. Your access is terminated. But here's where the story gets truly alarming. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is rushed into a classified emergency briefing. The news waiting for him behind those closed doors is far worse than frozen soybean contracts. China isn't just cutting off agricultural purchases. They're simultaneously restricting export licenses for lithium carbonate, the absolutely critical material that powers every electric vehicle battery, every energy storage system, every piece of technology America is betting its industrial future on. This isn't a trade spat. This is surgical economic warfare. When Bessent emerges to face the cameras, his words are sharp. He accuses Beijing of, quote, weaponizing economic policy, using trade as a geopolitical weapon. The statement sounds strong, decisive even. But leaked conversations from inside the Treasury tell a completely different story. Behind closed doors, Bessent's own advisors admit something uncomfortable. They saw this coming. For 2 full years, Washington imposed increasingly harsh tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, semiconductor chips, and clean energy equipment. The strategy was called economic security. The goal? Bring manufacturing back home, reduce dependence on China. Beijing watched, Beijing waited. And then Beijing struck back. Not where America was strong, but precisely where it was weakest. Food supply, energy storage, the foundations of both American agriculture and its technological future. The numbers tell the brutal truth. According to Bloomberg's detailed analysis, American agricultural shipments to China dropped nearly 40% during the first half of 2025. Meanwhile, Brazilian exports to China surged by almost exactly the same amount. China didn't eliminate its need for soybeans. It simply replaced American suppliers overnight. Let's travel to Des Moines, Iowa, the agricultural heart of America. The massive grain silos that dot the landscape are overflowing. The air hangs heavy with the thick smell of damp grain mixed with diesel fumes from idling trucks. But something is, terribly wrong. The buyers who normally flood these facilities have disappeared. Delivery appointments are canceled. Cargo loads are rejected. Storage space becomes critical. Think about the scale here. China previously purchased over 30 million tons of American soybeans every single year. This season, not one cargo ship moves toward Chinese ports. Not one. Farmers face an impossible choice. They can't store crops indefinitely. Grain rots, spoils, becomes worthless. So they sell at devastating losses, accepting prices that fall far below what it costs to plant, fertilize, and harvest. One cooperative manager, standing among mountains of unsellable grain, puts it bluntly to Reuters, "You can't warehouse decay." Meanwhile, the lithium situation reveals an even more troubling reality. Bloomberg New Energy Finance confirms that China now controls more than 80% of the world's lithium refining capacity and battery cathode production. The United States might have lithium deposits in its soil, but without refining capabilities, those raw materials are nearly useless. You can mine lithium domestically all you want, but if you can't process it into battery-grade material, you're entirely dependent on whoever can. And right now, that's China. Total dependence, complete vulnerability. Inside the halls of power, tensions are, well, really boiling over. Some advisors push for immediate, aggressive retaliation, more tariffs, export restrictions, economic sanctions. Show Beijing that America won't be pushed around. But Bessent argues forcefully for restraint. In private meetings that would later leak to the Wall Street Journal, he delivers a devastating assessment that cuts through the political posturing. The United States launched a trade war without first securing its food security or energy infrastructure. Read that again. America picked a fight without protecting the things that matter most. The quote spreads like wildfire online, shared and reshared, because it captures something profound. Financial analysts immediately recognize what Beijing has done. This isn't random chaos. This is calculated precision. By simultaneously targeting soybeans, the backbone of rural America's economy, and lithium supplies, the foundation of America's electric vehicle future, China strikes at both the country's present and its future in one coordinated move. And the preparation runs deep. The Financial Times reveals that China has already locked down Brazilian grain supplies through 2026 using COFCO, its massive state purchasing agency. These aren't small contracts. We're talking about $23 billion in transactions, and here's the kicker, settled entirely in Chinese renminbi, completely bypassing the US dollar. On the lithium front, Chinese companies like Ganfeng are rapidly expanding refining operations in Jiangxi province with enormous state-backed financing and access to ultra-low energy costs that Western competitors openly admit they cannot match. The playing field isn't level. It never was. Back in America's Midwest, the damage spreads outward like cracks in breaking ice. Regional banks, watching their agricultural loan portfolios crater, freeze new farm lending. The U.S. Department of Agriculture had already warned that agricultural debt could reach $600 billion due to elevated interest rates. Now, with export revenues collapsing, the collateral backing those loans simply disappears. Trucks sit idle outside ethanol plants. Planned storage facilities are canceled mid-construction. The shockwaves reach major manufacturers. Deere, the iconic American tractor and equipment maker, announces a 20% production cut. 20%. Thousands of workers face uncertain futures. Further west, in Nevada's Thacker Pass, bulldozers carve into the desert landscape as the federal government takes a minority stake in a lithium venture connected to General Motors through multi-billion-dollar loans. Officials proudly announce this as American self-reliance. Analysts see something different: expensive desperation. Chinese lithium refiners still operate at costs up to 40% lower than American operations could ever hope to achieve. Another leaked internal memo from Bessent to President Trump lays out the harsh long-term reality of economic decoupling. Government subsidies might cushion immediate losses, the memo explains, but they cannot recreate vanished demand. The Wall Street Journal's analysis is stark. For every $1 billion in lost Chinese consumption, approximately 10,000 rural jobs disappear. Congress approves rescue packages totaling $20 billion. But here's the fundamental problem. Legislation cannot manufacture buyers. You can subsidize farmers. You can prop up prices. But you cannot force China to buy American soybeans if they've already replaced you. Beijing's official statements are carefully crafted. They speak of food security diversification, of building resilience, of protecting national interests. The language is clinical, bureaucratic even. But the leverage is undeniable. The original stated goal of America's trade confrontation was to bring production back home, to rebuild domestic manufacturing. Instead, what we're witnessing is collapsing farm exports and constrained access to critical minerals. Two sides of the same failed strategic approach. And China's preparations extend far beyond soybeans and current lithium supplies. Bloomberg tracks surging Chinese investment in Argentina's Salar de Olaroz, one of the world's most significant lithium deposits. These deals secure roughly a quarter of future global lithium supply for Chinese companies. Reuters reports Chile, another lithium giant, deepening partnerships with Tianqi Lithium, effectively shutting out American firms from access. Think about the timeline here. Building comparable supply chains would require billions upon billions in capital investment and somewhere between 5 to 7 years of intensive construction. China started building this advantage 2 decades ago, while America debated quarterly earnings. In America's agricultural heartland, the crisis transforms from financial to logistical. Traffic along the Mississippi River, the crucial artery that moves American grain to export terminals, falls 40% year over year. Storage costs skyrocket as facilities designed for flow, not long-term warehousing, overflow. Some farmers, desperate to clear space before crops spoil entirely, dump soybeans into biofuel plants at a loss. It's economic suicide, but the alternative is watching everything rot. Meanwhile, in Shenzhen, a BYD executive publicly boasts that the company's battery division now produces more lithium-ion cells in 3 months than Tesla's massive Nevada gigafactory generates in an entire year. The gap isn't narrowing, it's accelerating. Washington initiates an urgent review of the Phase 1 trade agreement signed years earlier, determining that China quietly abandoned its purchase commitments long ago. Treasury officials issue stern warnings that trying to enforce fixed purchase quotas is strategically flawed, pointing out that China possesses asymmetric power, particularly over rare earth elements still deeply embedded throughout American supply chains. Those warnings are largely ignored. Agricultural trade becomes campaign talking points and political theater. Critical minerals, however, trigger genuine alarm in classified briefings. Winter brings deeper cold. As winter approaches, new reports surface. Beijing has authorized fresh restrictions on graphite exports, yet another essential electric vehicle battery component. Fresh tremors ripple through American manufacturing. Major vehicle manufacturers quietly begin postponing new model releases. No official explanations are offered, but the pattern becomes clear to those paying attention. Scattered economic indicators that once moved independently start converging into a unified crisis picture. Soybean markets slide to their weakest levels in 5 years. American battery manufacturers watch their cost advantages erode by more than 30% in mere months. Stress emerges across economic sectors that previously operated in separate worlds. Decisions made in semiconductor policy unexpectedly stall agricultural exports. Subsidies intended for domestic mineral extraction expose critical bottlenecks in refining capacity. Policy levers that once worked in isolation are now hopelessly entangled, like fishing line knotted beyond repair. As autumn transitions to winter, a confidential Treasury analysis begins circulating among senior government officials. Its assessment is severe. If China maintains current restrictions on soybean and lithium flows for 12 months, the United States could suffer economic damage approaching 1% of GDP. That translates to hundreds of billions in lost economic output. The report delivers an even more sobering warning. Even if trade channels eventually reopen, previous demand levels would not return. China has fundamentally rerouted its supply networks. Brazilian and Russian producers have permanently filled the void. And here's a detail that should alarm everyone. Vast stretches of eastern Russian farmland are now leased to Chinese agricultural operators, transforming abstract concepts of food security into concrete operational reality. The public facade cracks. Public statements from Treasury officials emphasize calm and endurance. They frame the situation as a test of American resilience rather than a confrontation spiraling beyond control. But the tone lacks conviction. Anyone listening carefully can hear the uncertainty. News coverage simplifies the crisis into a personality-driven clash between Washington and Beijing, missing the deeper structural problems. Meanwhile, financial analysts privately question whether American markets can withstand simultaneous pressure on both food systems and energy infrastructure. As the calendar turns to a new year, stark contradictions sharpen into focus. Mining projects move forward with great fanfare. Yet processing facilities remain woefully insufficient. Farmers complete harvests without reliable export destinations. One segment of the economy cannot sell overseas while another cannot secure essential foreign inputs. China unveils a joint strategic metals initiative with multiple developing economies, forming a coalition that now commands much of the world's lithium refining capacity, alongside substantial agricultural export power. On a stormy evening in Washington, a senior Treasury official leaves headquarters carrying a sealed report examining the intersection of energy storage supply chains and food trade dynamics. Its core conclusion is stark and undeniable. The country currently restricting American agricultural access is simultaneously central to U.S. battery supply chains. The document receives no public acknowledgement. It is quietly filed away as government offices go dark for the night. Markets fracture, power shifts. Financial markets respond unevenly to the overlapping crises. Bond yields rise as investors price in economic uncertainty. Demonstrations grow across rural regions where entire communities face collapse. Automakers desperately request policy direction that never arrives. Abroad, Chinese state media dismisses American objections as inconsequential rhetoric, while domestic policy responses inside the United States begin fraying at the edges. Emergency agricultural support protects farmers from immediate bankruptcy, but dramatically deepens fiscal imbalances. Trade barriers intended to protect American industry instead push domestic prices higher for consumers. Then, a symbolic shift occurs that financial historians will study for decades. Brazil and China conduct an entire quarter of soybean transactions using Chinese renminbi instead of US dollars. It sounds technical, but the implications are profound. For generations, the dollar's role as the global reserve currency has given America enormous economic leverage. That foundation is beginning to crack. Privately, analysts warn that Beijing may deliberately avoid dramatic escalation, instead allowing pressure to build gradually until political resistance inside America forces compromise on Chinese terms. Reports surface that China has tightened rare earth export controls just as legislative momentum in Washington stalls completely. Investors label the situation decoupling without replacement. Farming states describe it more bluntly: abandonment. The final squeeze. Shortly after, a discreet notice from Chinese commerce authorities announces that lithium compounds, graphite, and rare earth alloys will now require national security reviews before export approval. In urgent meetings with industry executives, U.S. officials are forced to acknowledge the full extent of American exposure. Internal government data reveals a shocking reality. Domestic lithium reserves could support American battery production for barely 1 month at current consumption rates. Even more troubling, most battery component shipments still transit through Chinese-controlled ports. Deliberate delays at those ports could shut down American factories across multiple states within weeks. Meanwhile, Brazil establishes a new renminbi-based agricultural trade settlement system, the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. Within days, U.S. dollar usage in bilateral agricultural trade drops to historic lows, signaling a subtle but lasting shift in global monetary influence. A classified monitoring report circulating among policymakers forecasts continued decline in American agricultural exports if China's supply diversification strategy continues uninterrupted. The report warns that coordinated commodity management by emerging economies could permanently weaken American pricing power in global markets. One widely circulated commentary distills the entire crisis into a single devastating sentence: the United States has simultaneously lost influence over food supply and energy storage. The phrase spreads rapidly through policy circles and financial media because it captures years of strategic miscalculation in just 14 words. The reckoning. Global observers watch with a mixture of fascination and concern as a leading world power confronts the boundaries of its own approach. America is attempting to secure both agricultural stability and technological leadership simultaneously, while both have become dependent on the very rival it sought to restrain. Think about the irony embedded in that reality. China's strategy was never about blunt retaliation or dramatic confrontation. It was methodical, deliberate, patient. By applying economic pressure at one carefully chosen point, Beijing revealed critical vulnerabilities at another. By controlling both the food supplies America's heartland depends on and the battery materials America's future requires, China demonstrated a form of leverage that tariffs and sanctions cannot easily counter. Washington now faces a fundamental question that has no easy answer. Can a country sustain its people and power its technological future when control over both no longer rests in its own hands? The cargo ship we started with, still drifting off the coast, still waiting for orders that may never come, has become an unintentional symbol, a symbol of disrupted supply chains, of vanished markets, of strategic calculations that failed to account for interconnected vulnerabilities. As winter deepens across America's farmland and factory floors, one truth becomes inescapable. In the race to secure economic independence, America may have instead locked in a more dangerous dependence. And the country that spent decades building the infrastructure, securing the relationships, and controlling the supply chains isn't scrambling to catch up. It's already won. The silent siege wasn't announced with missiles or invasions. It arrived through canceled contracts and restricted export licenses. Through commodity flows rerouted and currencies quietly shifted. History may record this moment not as a dramatic confrontation, but as the period when economic power fundamentally realigned. When the nation that fed the world and promised to lead its electric future discovered it could no longer guarantee either. The question now isn't whether America can respond, it's whether there's still time to matter.